Hello, and welcome to the lore of Braunhaven. Today we're going to be talking about the Khutoum mine and the Slipniesz Goblins. And so the Khutoum mine actually is just north just a slightly northeast of the Karazug, the rock skull orc encampment. And it sits on the western banks of the Great River, and it was founded nearly 500 years ago. There were four brothers and their wives, dwarves, that set out from Zlatoheim, and their goal was to strike it rich. They wanted to find ore, and the four brothers were going to hopefully found their own dwarven hall, and they ended up scuttling down the eastern side of the Skelos Mountains and settled along the western bank of the Great River, and they discovered an ore vein, multiple ore veins actually, of gold, silver, and electrum. And so over time they dug and they built up their their mines, and finally they drew further dwarves from Zlatoheim into their clan, their newly founded clan, and founded the Dwarven Halls of Khutoum. And at its height, Khutoum had a total of 175 dwarves, and they were just mining away at gold and silver and electrum, and they were becoming quite wealthy. They were, for a small clan of 175 dwarves, they were doing very well, and they ended up digging north underground, north and west, and stumbled into passages through the underworld that allowed them to connect a trade route between Khutoum and Zlatoheim. And so they had this underground trade route through the underworld that went from the west banks of the Great River all the way up through the Skelos Mountains to the very top to Zlatoheim. And that went on for quite a while, and they were very successful. But in negative 175, a horde of goblins that were led by a cadre of hobgoblins spilled out of the northern underworld passages and pretty much ended that entire thing. They spilled into the mines, and the dwarves sealed their doors, their northern gates to the mines, and set themselves up in the halls. And um, the goblins and hobgoblins ended up laying siege, and that siege wasn't broken until the dwarves ended up being flanked. The hobgoblins, having a mind for tactics and strategy, hence their slightly larger race size and the difference between them and regular goblins. They uh, basically came out of a surface vent and came down the eastern slopes of the Skelos Mountains and came in through the surface entrance on the west bank of the Great River, and the siege eventually was broken. And the hobgoblins and goblins basically killed the dwarves, men, women, and children, to the last one. And now, all these years later, they are the ones that control Khutoum. And Khutoum, today, in the current age, is home to hundreds, several hundreds of goblins and hobgoblins. And it is ruled over by a goblin king named Rirk. And King Rirk is an interesting fellow in and of himself. He is an oddity, really, among goblins. He is a little bit smarter than your average goblin. Not a lot, but a little bit. And he was always known as the smartest whelp of the clutch, and he avoided the clumsy attempts of his siblings to basically kill him or maim him so that he wouldn't be able to feed. And by the by the time that he had gained adolescence, for goblins that's usually about 3 or 4 years old. He had no he had no siblings because he had killed them all. He just had to. He realized that he had to wait for the right moment. He wasn't strong enough to fight them all off at once, so he would pick them off one at a time in dubious ways. Maybe it was a poisoned. Maybe he found poisoned mushrooms and sprinkled it in their food. What have you? But by the end, he was the last of his clutch, and this kind of secured him a position. Being in a war band because he was clearly valuable. Then and I mean, 3 or 4 years old. They go from womb to teat to being a soldier for the goblins, and I mean, being a goblin is a hard life. And he grew up in this goblin warband. I guess warband is not really necessary. It is a appropriate word, but at the same time it isn't. Goblins don't really have a military strategy themselves, so war isn't really something that they plan or think ahead about. Everything goblins do is almost reactionary. Goblins show up, they see something that they want, and then as a horde, they attempt to take it. But if they see that they have an overwhelming force against them, or even a few of their number are killed, they will retreat and attempt subterfuge in order to get what they want. But they are pernicious. They will not let go of something that they want. They will continue to try and take it until they succeed or until they're all dead. And Rick kind of really saw this, and he showed his ability to move through the internal squabbling and, if you can call it as such, political machinations of the internal functionings of the goblinoid tribes. And by his mid-20s, he had already assassinated the previous king of Khutoum, and had risen high enough that he was able to take that position. And he's now in his twilight years, a ripe age of 32, and he's looking for ways that he can secure his legacy for his multiple clutches. And so, how that plays out is an interesting thing. The first thing that Rirk has done, whether anybody really truly wants to believe this or not, but he has decreed that everybody is welcome in Khutoum, whether they be from the underworld or from the surface world. Everyone is welcome, and he has opened up trade, and Khutoum has become a trade hub, more or less, between the surface worlds and those of the underworld. And this sounds great on paper, but the reality is only the most depraved individuals will go to Khutoum. Criminals and murderers and rapists, things of that nature, are rife. The other decree, of course, along with that, is that there's very little law in Khutoum other than the law of the Horde. And so slavery is legal, and stolen goods are frequently fenced, and even a murder is barely a side note. They don't investigate it, and there's no real police action, except for, as I said, actions that the Horde deems a threat, or that the Horde wants something that you have. Aside from that, there's no law. And so very, very few civilized people of the surface world are ever going to come into Khutoum. But he trades openly with anybody that has the coin to do so, and this includes races such as the Duergar or the Drow, sometimes even mind lashers. There are, it is not an infrequent sight to see mind lashers purchasing slaves, probably as food stock. And so, aside from this, Rirk really thinks that this open trade that he has somehow come up with, this idea, is going to secure his legacy, and that not that really goblins care about a family name, but he wants to pass it on, and he has the forethought to want to see this play out, and that future generations will benefit from Khutoum. And one of the things that the Slipniesz Goblins are really benefiting from is their occasional alliances with the Rockskull Orc tribes, because one thing that goblins are good at is sapping. They are good sappers. They can dig, and all not quite as good as dwarves. Um, and mostly that is because goblins don't care if they dig too fast and too deep and cause a cave-in. The reality of the matter is that goblins have the numbers, dwarves don't, and they have very little care for their children. And so you dig deep and fast, and there's a cave-in, and you kill 100 goblins. Oh well, we'll get 100 more, and then dig through the rubble and keep moving on. They'll probably eat the corpses. Now, in addition to the Slipnies, there is the hobgoblins, and the hobgoblins are actually commanded by General Pupix. Now, Pupix, she has her own aims on the throne. Hobgoblins, they have a very, unlike regular goblins, hobgoblins are slightly larger. They have a very regimented and militarized life. They do not encourage so much the wanton killing of whelps between one another like the goblins do. The goblins want the strongest out of them, and the hobgoblins, to a certain point, want the strongest. They also want their whelps to be intelligent enough to be able to strengthen the rest of the tribe. And so the hobgoblins, rather than just let them, be killed at the dinner table, they would much rather see a whelp be reprimanded brutally and then learn from that experience. And so hobgoblins have a little bit of a better idea of how to organize and fight. And she learned at an early age that really focusing on her martial prowess was where she was going to shine. And she ran with that to the point where she moved her way up through the ranks and is now general. But that is never going to be enough for General Pubix. And so what she really ultimately wants is she wants to be queen of the Slipniesz Goblins. But she has determined that Rirk is smarter than she would have expected. And he has kind of sequestered himself, and, he's not as easy to approach, and she can't just come out and outright kill him. Because the hobgoblins are a small portion compared to the horde of goblins that are in there, and Rirk really has I don't know that love is the right word, but his people can recognize that he is for them a good king. I don't necessarily think that would apply to surface races if they had a similar king. Well, it doesn't apply. They do have a similar situation, and nobody likes him. And so, so she wants to take over, but she can't just overtly do it. But if Rirk was to have an unfortunate accident, that could be her way up to the top. And she has actually attempted several times to facilitate exactly such an accident. And unfortunately, several of King Rirk's slaves have been poisoned, and nobody knows who did it. And they're attempting to get to the bottom of this. And one of these days, General Pepix thinks that maybe he's going to eat something that's poisoned, and then that will be her opportunity to move up. She hasn't really thought too far beyond that, but time will tell. It could be a case of might makes right, and maybe if she succeeds, the hobgoblins will end up, um, you know, sealing themselves off in the keep, and just being holding off the goblin hordes until the goblins recognize her as the queen. So aside from all of these political machinations, the reality is that ascension to the throne through murder is fairly common among goblins. I mean that you don't find goblins that die of old age, and probably the closest that anybody's ever gotten is King Rick. 32 is considered quite old for a goblin. It's not that they really have the longest natural lifespan to begin with, but nobody really knows what their natural lifespan is since nobody dies of old age. Usually it's more common than not, it's going to be because they did something stupid, and accidentally off themselves, but commonly they're just murdered and eaten. And so, Rirk is an oddity in a lot of ways. And so, Pupix would be Rirk's biggest threat. But, there are others. King Rirk has the Rockskull Orcs. He recognizes that their partnership with the Rockskull Orcs really isn't as while it is beneficial presently, he can think far enough ahead, probably a couple months at least, and realize that they aren't that benign, helping force that they might lead him to believe. And if they could, and if they could control the goblins, they would, of course, integrate the Slipniesz Goblin tribes directly into the Rockskull and become one large unifying force. In fact, this is something that is desirable, to Gruul Dwarf Smasher. But even he sees the problems with goblins. Goblins are just unruly, and he may not exactly know how to keep them in line. And, his arm will get worn out from beating them with whips. So there's that entire problem. But in the meantime, the Slipniesz goblins, these mines to the north, have definitely they're not mined out, and so the Slipniesz goblins, in addition to all of their stolen goods fencing and slave trading, these mines have produced plenty of ore that really have made the Slipniesz goblins quite wealthy. Comparatively for for a goblin tribe in the underworld, and so they are quite successful, and the other races of the underworld kind of benefit from the fact that Khutoum exists, and so the Drow have their own problems. The Duergar are benefiting from the fact that Khutoum exists, so nobody has bothered to really want to take it over, and until the goblins slip up and are no longer being beneficial to the rest of the underworld, it seems to be a better solution to just leave them be and allow things to go as the status quo. So that is Khutoum. And next week we will be talking about, we will be moving on, and we'll be talking about we will be talking about the Imperial Port. So catch us next time. That will be we'll be starting that on Thursday, and we'll be looking at the Imperial Port at Tassadantalus's Tower. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.